Hello everyone, I'm Calluna, and welcome back to another Game of Thrones episode breakdown. Looks like things are finally heating up this time as Daenerys decides to take Olenna's advice and be a dragon. Let's delve into the events of Season 7, Episode 4, The Spoils of War. Highgarden. The Lannister and Tarly forces are leaving Highgarden, having taken all the wealth and good from the area. Interesting that they aren't showing any other bannermen from the Reach, just the Tarlys. We know Jaime made a point that the other Reach Lords would look to Randyll Tarly to make their decisions, so I'm a little surprised we're not seeing any other banners. But then again, the show does have a habit of only showing the banners for houses that we know the names of, like in the Battle of the Bastards last season where we saw the Umber's coat of arms. Bronn gets paid by Jaime, and from their conversation we learn that after Cersei blew up the Sept, it seems no other followers of the Faith of the Seven have come forward to become the new High Septon. Interesting. Bronn is irritated that he doesn't have a castle yet, since that was part of what he expected after breaking off his engagement to Lolly Stokeworth. Seems like Bronn is getting tired of working for Jaime. This is in line with his book counterpart, who settles down with Lolly's and isn't really involved in other fighting since Tyrion's arrest. Bronn recognizes the danger of being a sellsword and just wants to find a castle to settle down in. If Jaime keeps forcing him into dangerous situations, perhaps he's not going to keep tagging along. When Bronn asks half-jokingly for Highgarden, Jaime tells him it wouldn't be a good choice, since they're at war, they've emptied it of all its wealth, and it would be a rather difficult castle to keep. The people would be resistant to the new rule, which Jaime focuses on again by telling Bronn to keep the soldiers encouraging the farmers from the Reach to hand over their provisions to the armies. Kind of sad to see that Jaime's doing this. Book Jaime makes sure that the farmers in the Riverlands keep a fair share of their food during the second siege of Riverrun. Jaime is trying to become more of the honorable knight that Brienne sees in him. You could argue that since the Tyrells fought against the crown, this is payment for that, but the Tarlys, and presumably the other lords of the Reach, are now allying with the Lannisters. Won't they find this a bad move? I don't know, this just seems like bad PR to me, making the small folk suffer due to the decisions of the nobility. King's Landing. Tycho Nestoris and Cersei are chatting again about debts. While the Iron Bank is happy that the crown will be clearing its debt, it's clear from Tycho's tone that the fact that the entire debt will be paid off at once isn't as nice for the bank. The interest that has been accumulating would all be cleared. He offers having the bank be called upon again to help with the war, to which Cersei replies that Qyburn is requesting help from the Golden Company, a sellsword company in Essos. The Iron Bank has often used them to collect debts from those who didn't pay back loans, so he gives them a glowing recommendation. The scene ends with Tycho telling Cersei the Iron Bank will give their full support to Cersei's cause once the gold arrives. And since this point was made so clear, I was actually rather surprised that by the end of the episode it actually made it back. The Golden Company plays a larger role in the books, as it is the sellsword company that ends up swearing allegiance to young Griff, a young man who is supposedly Rhaegar's son Aegon, who was smuggled out of King's Landing as an infant. Since Aegon was omitted from the show, though, we've only heard about the Golden Company in passing, once mentioned by Davos and another by Jorah, who served as a sellsword for them. In the show only, though, it's never specified with which groups Jorah once belonged to in the books. It's interesting to see that Cersei is outsourcing to Essos. Since Dany is using the Dothraki and the Unsullied, it's actually a rather smart choice to hire a company from the other continent. Since Dany's conquering of the Free Cities and her outlawing of slavery, she has made many enemies. I was wondering if Cersei was going to exploit that, especially if Dany isn't in Essos anymore. It's only a matter of time before those who were in power before take it back, so Cersei could try to find allies from those who hate Daenerys. With the mention of sellswords, I was wondering if Daario would make another appearance. If he's a man scorned, he could be a potential ally for Cersei. It'll be interesting to see if this gets explored further in the season. Winterfell. Littlefinger wastes no time trying to get in good graces with Bran, since by normal succession he would be the proper Lord of Winterfell. He gives Bran the Valyrian dagger that was used by the Catspaw to try and kill him way back in Season 1. Seems like Littlefinger has been holding on to it the whole time. Why? I know it's Valyrian steel, but what point was there in him holding on to it? In the books, Littlefinger wore it and bragged about how he used it to betray Ned, but in the show, he's been keeping that on the down low. As Littlefinger tries to get in Bran's good graces, Bran manages to use his green sight to out-creepy Littlefinger by quoting him, "Chaos is a ladder." Now, if only Bran could sort through the memories to see the part where Littlefinger betrayed Ned, or lied to Catelyn, or something useful that would let the Starks just get rid of him. That would be nice. Hopefully we will try to find out who the cat's paw was sent by. Jaime theorizes that Joffrey did it in the books to try and impress Robert, since Littlefinger admits he actually won it from Robert, not Tyrion. It hasn't been confirmed, but there's definitely something there that will hopefully be addressed in later books. In the show, though, perhaps Bran will see the cat's paw being hired in the first place. That would be neat. Mira comes in and tells Bran she is leaving Winterfell to go be with her family. After everything she's been through, I can completely understand. When Bran doesn't show any emotional reaction to her leaving, she gets angry at him, not understanding how Bran can be so cold, especially after everyone they've lost. Jojen, Hodor, and Summer. Mira says that Bran died in that cave too, that the Bran in front of her isn't the same person she knew, which is right, since this Bran is just Three-Eyed Raven 2.0. Poor Mira, I hope we get to see her again after this, but honestly, her heading back home to be with her family is probably one of the nicer ends for a character. Maybe we will get a chance to see Howland Reed as he is now. We've only seen him in the flashbacks, and I'd like to hope he wasn't just introduced for those scenes alone. He's the only other person to know about Jon Snow's true birth, so maybe Mira going back home will make him return, or send a letter explaining about the Tower of Joy. Arya has made it back to Winterfell. Again, no consequences for her journey back despite the cold weather getting worse. In an homage to Arya not getting recognized by the guards at King's Landing in Season 1, the Winterfell guards are idiots and don't let her in at first, though she manages to slip away to the crypts. After Sansa is made aware of this, she heads down and has a kind of awkward reunion with Arya. It makes sense, considering they were never close. They talk about how it's nice Joffrey is dead, and Sansa dismisses Arya's mention of her kill list as a joke. They look at the statue of their father, bonding over their loss. When Sansa mentions Bran being back, there's no mention of Rickon. Was this intentional? Like, did Sansa imply what happened to him? Hard to say, but you'd think with it being so recent she'd mention something about it. The girls meet up with Bran at the Weirwood Tree, where he mentions having seen Arya at the crossroads. Sansa mentions Bran's visions, but in a kind of dismissive tone. She's definitely wary of Bran ever since his "you were so beautiful" comment. He shows the girls the dagger, mentioning Littlefinger gave it to him. Arya wonders why a cat's paw would have a Valyrian steel dagger, to which Bran replies someone very wealthy wanted him dead. And Sansa says not to trust a gift from Littlefinger, which, yeah, duh. Bran gives the dagger to Arya instead. It is Valyrian steel after all. Arya could definitely use this in the upcoming War for the Dawn. When the three of them return to Winterfell, Brienne and Podrick see the reunited Stark siblings. Podrick comments that Brienne completed her vow and Catelyn Stark would be proud. It is a really touching moment for these two, who I absolutely adore, and yes, Brienne did play a large part in assisting Sansa, but she is right when it comes to Arya. She wasn't exactly the one to bring Arya home after all. But it is nice to see her appreciate the sentiment from Podrick. Oh boy, so now all the Starks are back, with the exception of Jon, who's still on Dragonstone. Littlefinger's looking worried. More and more of the wolf pack is coming together, and he's noticing that his influence isn't really affecting anyone anymore. Bran is creepier than him, Arya never liked or trusted Littlefinger, and Sansa is officially done with his shit. If he was smart, he would keep his head down and avoid scheming, but it wouldn't be Game of Thrones if someone did the smart thing now, would it? Okay, Bran, can we please conveniently see the visions with Littlefinger being implicated for something? Come on! Dragonstone. Dany and Missandei are wondering about the status of the Unsullied attack at Casterly Rock, and Dany and Missandei have a cute moment where Missandei mentions her last encounter with Grey Worm. But before we can have a conversation that certainly wouldn't pass the Bechdel test, Jon Snow interrupts to take them into the Dragonglass Cave. Dany leaves her Dothraki guard behind. Okay, I guess this is a show of good faith? Still, I would have brought at least one with her. As Jon shows her the cave, the music and the look on her face make it seem really amazing and huge. Sure, but it's really hard to see. Lighting, D&D, 7 seasons in, and your lighting is still really shitty sometimes. And remember, Tyrion said Dragonglass wasn't worth that much, so you gotta wonder why Dany looks so amazed at all this. It's really important to Jon, and we know how much it will help against the White Walkers, but Dany shouldn't know that. Jon then shows Dany some carvings made by the Children of the Forest. We once again see the swirl pattern that's been brought up a couple of times, indicating the magic of the children. We still aren't sure what the significance of it means, though. Jon tells the story of the children and the First Men using the incredibly convenient cave drawings, showing that they banded together to fight the White Walkers. Interesting that the first set of drawings are crude, yet the White Walkers have such stunning detail, even down to the blue-colored eyes. Once again, Jon begs Dany to help him band together, and she tells him she will when he bends the knee. Again, he says his people won't accept a southern ruler, but this time she fights back with saying that if they put their faith in him, if he makes the decision to bend the knee, they will accept it. Dany is making a good point here. If survival is worth more than his pride, why doesn't he just bend the knee to her? Especially now that she's showing good faith towards him by allowing him access to the dragon glass. I'm kinda with Dany on this one. If Jon can forgive the sins of the Karstarks and the Umbers with how recent those events were, surely uniting with the Mother of Dragons could only be beneficial for their cause. At least we're finally getting some chemistry with Dany and Jon now. It is still a little icky considering he is her biological nephew, but hey, Targaryens are all for that incest. And it's obvious this couple is what the show is leaning towards, so we're going to have to get used to it. As they leave the cave, Tyrion and Varys arrive, telling Dany about the attack at Casterly Rock, but also that their fleet was wiped out by Euron Greyjoy. Dany is understandably upset about the loss of the fleet, the attack at Highgarden, and the loss of the food supply they were supposed to receive. Tyrion mentions that they do still have enough ships to bring the Dothraki to the mainland, but Dany is done with Tyrion's shitty plans, and frankly, so is the audience. She wants to fly the dragons right to the Red Keep and burn it all down, but then she asks Jon what he thinks, oddly enough. He says if Dany attacks the city with the dragons, she wouldn't be any better than Cersei, and if she wants the support of the people, she can't just burn it. Guess their magical cave moment made her suddenly want to start asking Jon for advice, which he ends up being correct about. Jon's words do manage to cut to the point. Northerners aren't one to mince their words. It's kind of nice to have Dany getting some rather blunt advice for once. Winterfell. Again. Brienne is training Podrick again when Arya comes to watch. Nice to see that she's tying her hair back like Jon and Ned, really showing that she's taking on her Stark heritage again. Good visual cues. Arya wants Brienne to spar with her, which she agrees to, and we get this admittedly cool fight scene between them. How exactly Arya got so good at fighting with her sword is beyond me. I guess we're supposed to just assume she used what she learned at the House of Black and White? She didn't exactly train with a sword, though. Brienne is one of the strongest warriors in the world, and Arya manages to hold her own against her? Even with a real blade versus Brienne's training one, and maybe Brienne holding back, it does seem a bit otherworldly how Arya got so good. Brienne is impressed with her skill, asking where she learned, and Arya replies with no one, which you'd think is a reference to the Faceless Men, but really she didn't learn from them. Most of her style, you could say, is from Syrio Forel's training. Really, she got that good because she needs to be badass, since that is what Arya does. Again, I'm not the biggest Arya fan, but even the biggest Arya fanboy does need to recognize that the show is making her much more impressive than she logically should be given her training. She barely managed to defeat the Waif, yet she managed to graduate to strong enough to take on Brienne in a couple of weeks or months? Okay. Sansa and Littlefinger were discussing food supply again when they start watching the sparring, and the look of disbelief on Sansa's face shows just how much her sister's changed. Some fans were wondering why she walks away in a huff afterwards. I can think of a couple reasons. For one, Arya has become an amazing warrior in her time since Season 1, and she isn't the same younger sister that Sansa knew. It's possible she's upset that Arya has changed so much. Arya was the last reminder of her life before King's Landing, and seeing how her sister has become this hardened warrior shows she's truly gone through some harsh times. In addition, Sansa's experiences haven't really given her a tangible thing. Jon's been brought back to life by magic and is now King of the North despite being a bastard. Bran is back with mystical visions, and now Arya is an amazing super warrior. What does Sansa have? Powers of manipulation and common sense? It makes sense that the reunion with her siblings has overwhelmed her and made her rethink her position in the family. Perhaps she's worried she isn't truly contributing, that she hasn't become as strong of a player in the Game of Thrones as she once thought. Just as Littlefinger realizes the rules of the game don't apply in the North, Sansa is possibly seeing that now too. Dragonstone, again. Davos tries to get Jon to admit that he likes Daenerys, and man, I could just watch an hour of Liam Cunningham being the best wingman ever. He brings such levity and yet can also have some of the best serious moments on the show. Jon dismisses the idea of liking Daenerys, which is a little weird. Has he seriously not considered the idea of an alliance through marriage? I guess he doesn't have time and he's got more serious things on his mind, but you'd think, especially with Davos there, that the idea would have been mentioned. They run into Missandei, who asks what a bastard means, and they explain. Apparently marriage isn't a thing in Noth. Well, at least in the show, it's definitely a thing in the books. This conversation is used to explain why Dany's followers from Essos believe in her. They chose her as their leader because of what she's done for them. Although Dany believes the throne is hers by birthright, the reason she's come so far is because of her own merits. It's a nice turnaround. Jon sees that him and Dany do have more in common than he originally believed. This was actually a really good point that I'm glad the show took the time to make. Before, Dany was just being made to look like an entitled brat and a conqueror. Now, just as Davos is pointing out Jon was staring at her like an awkward middle schooler, she's a more nuanced and complex person than he gave her credit for. I wonder what this could lead to. The ship Theon got rescued on arrives, and as they come ashore, Theon is greeted by Jon, who he obviously didn't expect to see. He asks about Sansa, which is nice to see he's still concerned about her. Jon grabs Theon and obviously wants to throttle him, but says that since Theon helped Sansa escape, that's the only reason he isn't dead right now. Jon wouldn't mention Bran and Rick on here, since even if Sansa's told him about them, which she has to have at this point, Theon still murdered 2 innocent farm boys and took over Winterfell. Davos asks about the fleet, and Theon tells them about Yara being captured. He came back to ask Dany to help him rescue her. Unfortunately, Dany's not home right now. So yeah, not surprised Theon made it back to Dragonstone, since there's not really a lot of options for where else he could go after the attack. Dany isn't going to be too pleased to see him, but at least Theon can give her an update about the attack, which is more than what they'd had from before, I guess? Theon obviously wasn't expecting to see Jon, and I'm actually a little proud of him for how well he managed to keep himself together. He avoided taking Sansa to the wall once Brienne was with her so he wouldn't have to face Jon. Karma's kind of a bitch, huh? Blackwater Rush. The Lannister and Tarly forces have nearly made it back to King's Landing. They are at Blackwater Rush, a river near King's Landing that feeds into Blackwater Bay. Randyll Tarly tells Jaime all the gold has made it safely to the Red Keep, along with the majority of the food and provisions. This is the last of the army and the provisions that need to make it back. Jaime and Bronn also talk to Dickon, who regrets having to fight the men at Highgarden since many were his friends and former allies. Nice to see that Dickon has a good heart. Somehow Randyll managed to have 2 decent sons despite being a total asshole. We don't really know much about Dickon's personality in the books, though Sam does tend to think of Dickon in a similar fashion to his father. Bronn hears the sound of thunder, but he and Jaime figure out it's an approaching army and call the men to arms. They form a blockade with spears, a smart move, especially for an approaching army on horseback. Unfortunately, that's not the only thing coming. We see the Dothraki horse riders, and Bronn tells Jaime to ride back to King's Landing, but he refuses to leave his men. And then we see Drogon flying above the army with Dany riding on him, and she has him break the Lannister ranks with dragonfire. This allows the Dothraki to break through the blockade, and we get a rather well done battle sequence, with Dothraki fighting Lannister men, dragonfire everywhere, and it's pure chaos. The archers try volleying arrows, but they are ineffective against Drogon's hide. Since he can't use both hands, Jaime tells Bronn to shoot the scorpion at Drogon. Dickon manages to save Jaime from a Dothraki warrior, and poor Bronn fights his way to the scorpion, losing his gold along the way. For some reason, Tyrion is there, mostly to look on dramatically as he watches Lannister men be slaughtered by Dothraki or burned alive by dragonfire. Bronn manages to fire a spear at Drogon, which hits him in the shoulder, enough to wound him but not fatally. Drogon destroys the scorpion, Bronn just getting out of the way in time. Drogon lands, and Dany tries to pull the spear out. Jaime sees this as an opportunity to kill Dany and charges at her with a spear. Just before Drogon attacks him, Bronn manages to push him out of the way into the river. The last shot we see is Jaime sinking to the bottom of the river due to the weight of his armor. Oh man, this battle sequence was one I was waiting for all season. We finally get to see Dany's forces at play, the Dothraki managing to hold their own even though under normal circumstances they probably wouldn't fare well against armored soldiers. Her and Drogon setting everything on fire. There are so many shots of the ashes of corpses showing just how hot the fire is and how devastating a single dragon can be. Imagine if she had all 3 of her dragons. This is a smaller version of what happened to the Lannisters and Gardeners back in Aegon's conquest. He set his 3 dragons loose and decimated the soldiers mostly with dragon fire, then his smaller army cleaned up the remaining force. The only thing I wasn't a big fan of was that no one who was named got killed. Randall and Dickon were fine, or at least we didn't see them get killed. Jaime and Bronn somehow managed to live through that, and Drogon was only injured. I'm not surprised that the Scorpion didn't work. This was only the mid-season battle, and I doubted one of the dragons would be taken out this early. I have a feeling that each dragon is going to need a rider. That's how it's always been with dragons in previous history. Drogon and Dany are pretty tight, so it's just a matter of who's going to ride Rhaegal and who will ride Viserion. I think it's pretty obvious. Jon Snow is the son of Rhaegar, so he would probably ride the dragon named for his father. And Tyrion, who we know has the respect of the dragons after releasing them from their chains in Meereen, will probably ride Viserion. Like Viserys, he's the younger brother and wasn't ever expected to accomplish anything. So I think that the show will want to have the visual of those 3 riders flying on their respective dragons together, which is why I wasn't totally surprised by Drogon surviving the battle. Drogon's dragonfire really did some serious damage to the remaining food supply, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of it still made it to King's Landing. I mean, it would be really silly of Dany to destroy the food which she complained about losing earlier, so based on Randall's mentioning of this being the last of it, my guess is most of it made it in safe. However, the Lannister army has taken a serious hit with this attack, and all I can say is, yay, finally! Dany has managed to find a compromise. Although she isn't attacking the city itself, she's going after the army, which makes sense from a tactical sense. This way she's only taking out soldiers versus entire groups of civilians. I mean, it still sucks for the Lannister and Tarly forces, but at least it isn't a whole city block like Cersei. Looks like Tycho's prediction about another loan might come true after all. Preview. We see Drogon sitting on a hill with Dany's voiceover telling the remaining Lannister forces that she isn't there to murder. Well, I would have a hard time believing that considering recent events, but okay. She addresses the men telling them to bend the knee or die. You do have to wonder where they're going to align on this. On one hand, if they're like Dickon, they will have felt bad for killing the men at Highgarden, but on the other, Dany just turned the majority of their friends to ash. Hard choice. Although Bronn did go out of his way to save Jaime, though you could chalk that up to wanting to make sure his moneymaker didn't kick the bucket, I'm looking forward to seeing some kind of reunion with Bronn and Tyrion. I doubt that Jaime would make it back to King's Landing safely, but perhaps Tyrion, since he owes Jaime one for getting him out of the Black Cells, will let him return to King's Landing to report back to Cersei. If Tyrion was smart, he would make sure his brother was a hostage, but as we know, Tyrion doesn't think straight when it comes to his family. Especially after killing Tywin, Jaime probably won't be happy to see Tyrion here. But hey, maybe Bronn manages to sneak Jaime back to King's Landing. It wouldn't surprise me, but I won't be disappointed if that's not the case. Back at Dragonstone, Varys is telling Tyrion he needs to convince her to listen, and since the next shots are of Dany, one would first assume Varys is referring to her. But some have suggested perhaps Varys is talking about Cersei, trying to convince her to surrender, perhaps? Or join forces to help Jon? Yeah, I'm doubting that Varys would offer that. I don't think he's that optimistic about Cersei, but it's still good to mention the possibility just in case. Next is Dany riding Drogon back at Dragonstone and greeting Jon. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of interaction Jon will have with the dragon. Perhaps his Targaryen heritage will allow him to interact with Drogon in such a way that will impress Dany? Right now, Jon seems to be able to convince Dany to follow his advice. If Varys and Tyrion notice that this keeps happening, they might seek out his advice with regards to keeping Dany in control of herself. Dany is fire, wild, explosive, while Jon is ice, cool, calm, collected. The meeting of ice and fire isn't just their heritages, it's their personalities. It's probably why their first meeting didn't go so well at first. We see Cersei saying a generic, "We will defeat whatever threat comes our way," and another shot with her and Qyburn. Cersei looks more upset, judging by her body language. Perhaps she is learning about Dany's attack and concerned for Jaime? She does still show attachment to him, even if it mostly stems from narcissism. If Cersei becomes even more hardened by this, I can only imagine how much wildfire it would take to calm her. As Cersei loses more and more, she becomes more unpredictable. I cannot wait to see how she reacts. We might see more with the Scorpion. If she's having a conversation with Qyburn, maybe he's going to use more poison like he did with Tyene and Alleria. Maybe the next spears that get fired at the dragons will be coated in poison, a lesson from the Martells. Back at Dragonstone, Jon is now invited into the small council room and tells us that Bran has seen visions of the Night's King's army at Eastwatch. Guess Sansa has been sending him update letters through this after all. We see that Bran is warging into ravens to keep an eye on the whereabouts of the Night's King's army, which we had previously seen in the season trailers. Eastwatch is where Jon had sent the Wildling army, and also where the Hound saw a vision in the flames. Maybe this means we're going to see these characters meeting up at Eastwatch to take on the army. I have a feeling that despite everything, Dany is still going to need concrete proof to help with the army. Jon is telling her stories about ice zombies and visions and ravens. Even if he's convinced her, he will still have a hell of a time convincing everyone else. Maybe he can try to capture some whites to prove that the army of the dead is real? In any case, with Jon in the small council room, it looks like Dany is beginning to trust his opinions more and more. Hopefully that means they can come together to fight by the end of the season. Okay, so a lot has happened this episode. We got more chemistry with Jon and Dany, more of the Starks are reunited, and a really intense battle has made the war much more interesting. Sad to see that the episode was a lot shorter than normal, though I'm guessing the shorter runtime was due to how expensive it must have been to shoot this episode. It would have been nice to see some more scenes at King's Landing or Old Town, since the majority of this episode focused on Winterfell, Dragonstone, and the Reach. I was also a little sad we didn't get to see what Sansa was looking through when the guards were talking with her, but based on what she's been doing so far, it mostly looks like clerical work and the not-so-fun part of maintaining a castle. I hope that the look she had after watching Arya is not a sign of Littlefinger trying to manipulate the Starks again. After everything these kids have been through, I do not want him fucking it up. Sansa has already emotionally isolated herself from the lot, and really was only starting to warm up to Jon until right before he left. She even said that he cannot protect her. No one can. If the writers are playing around with foreshadowing and symbolism, perhaps those words will come back in a way she didn't necessarily mean, with Arya being no one. Perhaps Littlefinger's scheming could finally come to an end, since the Wolfpack is finally uniting again after everything he had done to break it apart. So, what did you guys think of the battle? Were you surprised that none of the main characters were killed? What do you think will happen to Jaime? Is he going to be taken prisoner, or will he manage to go back to King's Landing? Is Jon making any headway with Dany and convincing her to align, or will he have to bend the knee in some fashion? Who do you think was the one responsible for sending the Catspaw to kill Bran back in Season 1, and are we ever gonna actually find out? Finally, do you think anyone from the Lannister forces will bend the knee to Dany, like Bronn? Or are we gonna see more barbecued men? Post your thoughts and comments below. I'm curious to see what you guys thought of this episode. Hopefully the last 3 episodes can keep up the momentum. Well, I'm Calluna, and thanks for tuning in to another Game of Thrones episode breakdown. See you guys next week. Bye! Everyone, just wanted to let you know I have a Patreon page. If you're not familiar with Patreon by now, it's a website that allows you to donate a small amount each month to your favorite content creators. You'll get a bunch of different rewards depending on the amount that you donate. Feel free to check out my page to see what kind of rewards that you can get by helping to donate. Every little bit helps, and helps to make this show even better, so wouldn't be able to do it without you guys. Thanks.
Geek Vision.